I spend a lot of time on mindset work and really focusing on the bigger picture of what I'm doing and trying not to focus so much on the how is the money going to come or when or in what way, but reminding myself of all that I've accomplished in such a short period of time and all the times that things were rough. I talk about in my book, there was a period when I was writing my book where the business was losing money and I was completely depressed and would cry every time I drove down the street. And here I am writing a book about how the fact I'm living my best life. And I said to my therapist at the time, I was like, I can't even write. Like, how could I write about living my best life? Like, I am crying driving down the street, not knowing why, because I had slipped into this great sense of depression because I felt like a failure because the business was losing money.
As we're about to dive into another fascinating episode, can I ask you to help us out, please? If you'll subscribe and join our growing community, it'll mean a lot to us. You'll be helping our show to reach many more people, and you'll be part of a growing community of truly resilient entrepreneurs. Thank you. Now, let's get into it.
We're talking about that seemingly delicate balance today of being successful in our work as entrepreneurs and living well and fully at the same time. Our guest today is Jeanne Collins, who's chronicled her journey and the approach that changed her life and work in her memoir, 2 Feet In, Lessons from an All-In Life. Well, I do love this concept of an all-in life, where you have both feet in, none of this one foot on either side of the line or any of that. So let's go 2 feet in on this conversation today. Jeanne Collins is an award-winning interior designer. She left the corporate world behind to find her true self through design and through internal reflection. Some of the awards Jeanne swept up are Architectural Digest AD Pro 2024, Feature Designer. She won the 2022 Lux Magazine Red Award, and she was recently nominated as an HGTV Designer of the Year. Welcome to Resilient Entrepreneurs. It's the podcast where we speak with business owners and entrepreneurs from all around the world, from all walks of life, in the hopes that something you hear today will leave your business a little richer. We're your co-hosts, Vicki and Laura from 2for1 Branding, supporting new entrepreneurs as you launch your business and offering you the tools you need to succeed. It's why we invite experienced, successful entrepreneurs like Jeanne to share her wisdom with you on this podcast. But just before we talk to Jeanne, we'll ask you one small thing. It's something that will make a big impact. Show your love for this podcast by subscribing on the platform you're listening or watching on right now, and by doing so, you'll help others to find a fantastic resource for themselves. Thank you guys for getting us past the 10,000 downloads mark. Jeanne, it is an absolute pleasure to share our platform with you. Hello.
Oh, thank you, Vicki and Laura. It's so nice to meet both of you.
Jeanne, thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to tell you, I've had the pleasure of reading your book, and you are a spectacular storyteller. I was so engaged from page 1. So I just want to, first of all, start by saying that and thanking you for telling such incredible, really deep stories of resilience from childhood. And I'd love to ask the first question on this podcast: what childhood experiences can you share that taken you on the journey you are today? This is going to be a hard question for you because I know there are so many. There are so many. But is there one that you would say you would like to share that really had the most impact to who you are today and where you sit now in your journey?
Oh, wow. That is such a good question, because if you've read my book, there are a lot. I think the one that I think stands out the most, because to me it was a pivotal awakening in terms of my place within the town and the society in which we lived. So I was very fortunate. I grew up in a town of great affluence in Connecticut. However, we were not. My parents were divorced. And this was back in the 70s when people didn't really get divorced. And my mother moved us from New Jersey to Connecticut. So we moved about 2 hours away from my father. And this was before phones or anything. And so, I would only see my dad every other weekend and really no communication in between. And so my mother moved us to a town that had lots of wealth. And we're talking old school wealth. And I never knew that we were not wealthy until one day my mother used to take us to this store called the Rummage Room, which still exists. And we would walk down to town and we would go to the store and we would be allowed to buy something. And I bought a skirt, and I was so proud of this skirt, and it was orange and red, and I loved this skirt. And I wore it to school. And someone asked me where I got the skirt. And I said, proudly, I got it at the Rummage Room. And all the girls laughed. And they said, oh, that's the secondhand store. No one shops there. You must be poor. And it was my first realization about money and wealth and where we fit in that social status. And that, needless to say, carried through me all into adulthood because I was raised with a mother who always used to say, we cannot afford it, we cannot afford it, we cannot afford it. And that, to anyone who understands like the power of those mantras to you when you're younger, like that carries on way into your later years, and a lot of therapy to really figure out how to break that down and to feel like my worth and value as a human is not defined by my financial status, because at an early age you get marked by your value as a human being related to how much money you have, and that is not true. And it took me decades to kind of break that and recognize that my value is not tied to how much money I make or don't make.
So interesting, eh? Resilience in the financial realm, as well as the emotional, what that would have done for you at that time as a kid. And so you talk about this, I like to call it like a family cycle that you've broken when it comes to the financials and what money means. So do you also find that when you are successful in business in the early stages and you see the money coming in, then do you have a story around the money?
I think you always do. It's impossible to leave that story. And so I still work really hard now to define my success based on different metrics. And the success of my businesses and my platforms and my story and what I do is based not just, yes, financial success, because I need to be able to live, but also trying to make it more broad and make it be the impact that I have on other people's lives. And that is success as well. And then also the life that I've managed to create for myself, and looking inward and recognizing that the success of my businesses falls on multiple pillars, because those things will go up and down. Business could be really successful and then not. I mean, I'm in a service business, right? So you could be really successful 1 month and not the next, or 1 year and then not the next. And so it's trying to really remind myself that success is not defined just by the financial part of it, but also recognizing that I've been fortunate that I have worked really hard in my careers and I have had a lot of financial success, but then realizing now at this stage in my life that it needs to be more than just that, because it does.
Yeah, it does. The roller coaster ride of entrepreneurship is something that anyone who's ever been on this journey certainly understands. And it can be quite rocky and quite scary at times. So, what's your mindset when times are really rough? Like maybe you have a couple of months where things aren't going so well. What was it like for you in the early days before you kind of reached the level you're at now?
Yeah. So I think any entrepreneur will tell you, you are always worrying that where's the next piece of business going to come from? And I am too. You're always worried. It's like you take on more staff and, oh, am I really going to be able to generate enough revenue to pay for this additional person? Or you make an investment in equipment and am I really going to be able to make enough money to pay all of this? And so I think that fear is real for any entrepreneur, no matter how successful you are. It's just scaled up or scaled down based on the size of your business. So I think that's all very real. I spend a lot of time on mindset work and really focusing on the bigger picture of what I'm doing and trying not to focus so much on the how is the money going to come or when or in what way, but reminding myself of all that I've accomplished in such a short period of time and all the times that things were rough. I talk about in my book, there was a period when I was writing my book where the business was losing money and I was completely depressed and would cry every time I drove down the street. And here I am writing a book about how the fact I'm living my best life. And I said to my therapist at the time, I was like, I can't even write. Like, how could I write about living my best life? Like, I am crying driving down the street, not knowing why, because I had slipped into this great sense of depression because I felt like a failure because the business was losing money. And once I started to tell some of my friends that the business was taking a loss, all of a sudden I started to have a little freedom from that acknowledgement. And the reality is that the business was taking a loss, but the business was taking a loss because A, I did pay myself, and B, I invested heavily in advertising that year for my business to try to grow my business. So I had invested in the business to get it to grow. So when I looked at different metrics, like what's your profit margin percentage and what's your profit margin relative to your income and your sales, different metrics that are applicable to my business, those numbers were really strong. And so I had to change the way I looked at it. And once I started to tell people about what I was struggling with, it all of a sudden I started to feel better. And then literally 2 weeks before the year was about to end, I got a huge piece of business, huge, made it so the business made money. Everything was great. So you just never know. So you kind of have to remind yourself, like, just stay the course. And if you're good at what you're doing and you're doing the right thing and you're being fiscally responsible with your business, don't let yourself get stuck in the mindset trap that is easy, but it's work. I work at it.
That is such good advice, because having been in a business that was losing money and in a situation emotionally where I was very depressed because of it, the only thing you can look at is that bank account going down every week, every day, every month, and then wondering, how am I going to pay these bills? Because they're still there. And it's this big trap of an energy trap of, it just sucks you into that wormhole of despair. We look at different metrics to say, actually, I'm doing well. There's a reason for this happening, and it's strategic. Changes everything.
It does. And that's why it's important, if you don't understand the bookkeeping side of your business, it's important to find some coaching to understand that, because those metrics are the things that matter. And yes, was I spending more money than I was making? I was. But when I looked at some of the other metrics in terms of how I was running the business, I was actually doing a really good job based on the benchmarks for our industry. And so I was like, okay, I know how to make money at this industry. I just need to recognize that if I hadn't invested all of that money in advertising and marketing, I wouldn't be in this position, but I also wouldn't be in the position of the exposure that I got, such as the awards that I've had. I've only been in business for 4 years. So that takes an investment to get yourself out there. Once I changed the way I looked at it, it was different. And I did always pay myself too. So I have lots of entrepreneur friends, and I always say to them, profit first. Read that book if you haven't read it. It is so important to pay yourself, even if it's not a lot. It's so critical to pay yourself. And don't look at it as the business lost money because you paid yourself. You are a valued employee just like anybody else. And so that, I think, from a mindset perspective, also helped me.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. What helped you shift your perspective was when you started to tell people. Because I think that's something, a trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into, is that fear of telling people anything that's going on in your business. So we kind of fake it till you make it, and you have all this, but it doesn't work, right? It leads us to depression. It leads us to struggle and stress, and it comes out in different ways in our life. So what's some advice you have for a young entrepreneur who's in that, right? They're in the mud, they're feeling stuck, they don't know who to turn to. You mentioned some coaching, you've mentioned therapy. What else, or what other advice would you strongly recommend that someone just do to help themselves to move through it?
Find a networking group. So I have several networking groups. I have women in business networking groups. I have women entrepreneurs. I have female interior design networking groups. So I have different networking groups, and find a networking group, because the reality is there are so many other people that are in exactly the same spot that you are, or they were there a year ago or 2 years ago. And so they can get you a sense of inspiration by talking to other people, and also get you resources of other people. And I found entrepreneurs are such a special breed of people. And I come from corporate America, and corporate America is not like this. Entrepreneurs are so willing to help other entrepreneurs. And it, like, you automatically are part of a club that you didn't know you were joining. And if you find some sort of network, they are everywhere out there. They're out there on Instagram. They're out there, Small Business Association, different affiliates related to your industry. Just join a group, and you will find your people if you are open to it. And so I have leaned so heavily on the people that I know in those groups, even just finding resources to help me solve business problems, just someone to call when I'm having a really bad day, because they can relate to it. But then I also give that back to them. They can call me if they need, I'm really good at marketing. If they need marketing help, they call me, and I'm their sounding board for that. And it just helps to have someone else to talk to, and someone else just to be your cheerleader. That'll be like, no, you're doing this right. You've got this. And sometimes it's just so nice to have another entrepreneur be like, you've got this. You are going to succeed. You've got this. And it can mean everything.
It would be pivotal. Absolutely. Especially in a time when you were just describing things weren't going well. You're crying, driving down the street. Imagine having that community at that time, and someone just calls you and says, hey, let's do this. We've got this. It's so important. And Jeanne, look, I'm dying to get into more about the book and the whole concept of 2 feet in. But my first question is, because you mentioned you're good at marketing and you're talking about exposure, let's talk a little bit about your podcast strategy. This is first rodeo on podcasting. So the importance of podcasting for you and your strategy, and what would you do for others?
So when we were talking about this before we started recording, so podcasting for me is something, if you'd asked me 5 years ago if I would be on a podcast, would I be an entrepreneur? I would have said no way. B, would I be on a podcast, be an author? Absolutely no way. And C, would I be starting my own podcast? There is absolutely no way I would be doing that. And all of those are true. And so I've leveraged the power of podcasts. After I launched my book in July, I wanted to use the podcast platform as a way to see if the messages from my book would resonate with the public and would resonate with people, because I had a long-term goal of really becoming a speaker and using this platform to speak and to really wanting to reach other women and help empower women through my story. And that's why I wrote my story. And I thought, if I can empower one woman to take control of her life and feel like she lived a better life as a result of my story, then I will have succeeded. And so I've used the podcast platform as a way to talk about all of my passions. So I talk about interior design. I talk about being an entrepreneur. I talk about being a single parent. I talk about being a female in business. I talk about changing careers. I did a major career shift at 50 and then now own 2 businesses, now a third that's launching next month. I would have never in a million years. And how did I do it? How did I reach? How did I grow? How did I grow my Instagram following? How do I find clients? And then also something that's so important to me, which is all the internal. And what have I done for myself? And how have I focused internally on who I am? What is my purpose? What do I want my life to be like? What am I eating? What am I drinking? How am I exercising? What's my life like? Life-work balance. And so podcasting has given me the platform to be able to talk about all of those things, because there are so many podcasts out there. And part of the other reason why I did it was to find out, I had this inkling that I wanted to launch a lifestyle brand as an umbrella for all of my passions, with the purpose being to empower women to live all in. And I wanted to see if that platform would resonate and if there would be an interest, and podcast hosts would have an interest in that. And so I used it almost as a testing ground and a place to start my talk track and to meet different people. And I've gotten back so much more than I ever could have imagined. I have met some of the most incredibly fascinating people and entrepreneurs who are doing such great work that I have been able to partner with both professionally and personally. So to me, podcasting is like the gift that keeps on giving. And I never thought I would be doing what I'm doing, but I meet people like you that have such power. And I feel like we're so fortunate to have such power in our platforms to tell our stories and to help other people and inspire them through the journeys we've been on.
So I'm totally with you, Jeanne. Podcasting is absolutely my favorite thing. I love to listen to podcasts, and I love to have the opportunity to talk to amazing people like you and get your story out there to help the next generation of entrepreneurs who are trying to figure this thing out. And just to know that there is a community, just like you're saying, there is a network of people that want to help you. And I love what you said about entrepreneurs are those type of people that want to help, because that's really, really true. And I just wanted to drill that point down. If you are out there listening and you're trying to figure it out, reach out to another entrepreneur, somebody who's just a couple of steps ahead of you where you're trying to get to. I guarantee you they're going to open the door, because we've all been there. We know exactly what it feels like. So that's amazing. And I love that you've written this book with the idea of speaking more. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, the value of having a book and being an author can do for you. It can open you up to so many other stages and places to share your message, because it's such a powerful condensation of your life, your thoughts, your beliefs, your values, who you are as a person. And it then gives you so many things to talk about too on podcasts and on stages, right? So if you are the type of entrepreneur or a business leader that wants to speak more, a book is a great place to do that. So I want to talk about that transition right point, because that's where a lot of people have the fear, is transitioning from corporate job, the 9 to 5, the safe job, the paid leave and the paid vacations and all of that that feels like it comes with it, which I put all in air quotes because we all know that that's crazy. It's not true. But tell us what that transition was like. Why did you leave corporate America to take on this whole new crazy journey?
Well, I was forced, so I got fired. And I had worked in corporate America for 22 years, and I was the vice president of sales, and I ran a sales team for a public company in advertising. So I always say my boss was Wall Street. And when you do that, you were only as good as your last quarter. And it was a job filled with 24/7 and traveled and reported to Wall Street. And it was filled with so much stress. Now, I was very fortunate. I really enjoyed what I did. I loved my team. I believed in what we sold. And I was very financially successful and had more success than I ever could have imagined, both in my career and in moving up the ladder and also financially. And then in January of 2020, I got fired. And, I was part of a restructure, of which I was part of that restructure. And I knew, I was like, I'm restructuring myself right out of a job here. And I did. I restructured myself right out of a job. And the reality is, it was the greatest gift because it was a shove into facing the reality that it was a lifestyle that I didn't want to live anymore. And I was so, so stressed. And the impact that stress was having on my life, both physically and emotionally and mentally, and with my relationships, was really taking a toll on me and aging me very quickly. And so, since I was at that crossroads, it was right before COVID. I was turning 50 that year. It forced me to really look inward. And I think if it had happened 5 years earlier, I might not have made the same choice and been able to have quite the same inward reflection. But I kind of changed my mindset around it. And I was like, okay, I did that for 22 years. I was incredibly successful, more success than I ever could have imagined. I have another 20 years left to work. I mean, I'm a single parent. I'm easily working till I'm 70 here. It's not retiring anytime soon. So if I have another 20 years to build a career, imagine how successful I could be if I was really passionate about it and I really loved it. And imagine how good it could feel to wake up every morning and love what you do and be really excited about what you do. And so I set out on a journey to figure out, what did I love? What did I enjoy doing and what would make me happy? And I decided interior design was my hobby. And so I made the decision that I was just going to do a total 180 pivot and I was going to become an entrepreneur and I was going to launch my own design firm because I was too old to go work for somebody else, I decided. So I was like, okay, we're going to do it. We got to jump all in. We're doing it. And I went back to school and I got 2 degrees in interior design at the same time that I started my firm and had to figure out how to be an entrepreneur and how to run a business and how to be an interior designer. But it gave me something so purpose driven because I love what I do. And writing the book came after that. I decided about a year and a half ago that I was going to write a book because everyone said my stories and my path were really inspiring. And I thought, wow, if I could just inspire one other woman to make a change or think a little bit differently, like we're only here once. And it's so nice to have such passion for what I do and such inner peace. And everyone says your energy is amazing. And I'm like, if I could just give like a tiny little piece of that to somebody else and they could then feel empowered to make their lives better, then that's such a gift. And I feel like I have that and I have that platform. So therefore, I plowed through. I mean, hey, trust me, there were so many people when I changed careers that were like, you're going to do what?
Oh, I'm
You're
sure.
not an interior designer. You're not an interior designer, though. I'm like, I know I'm not. I was like, I wasn't an author either, but now I am. And it is amazing. If someone had said to me, are you creative? I would have said, no way. But the reality is I actually am. I just can't draw, but I am in so many other ways. And so once you kind of take the stereotype away of what society thinks you should be and what box you should be in, and you let your skills come out and you let yourself become your true self, it is amazing what we can do as humans. Like, unbelievable.
So inspiring, Jeanne. And is this principle of having 2 feet in, is that kind of the driving force, the foundation of your success?
It is. When I was writing my book, I had a friend say, you approach problems slightly differently than other people do. And when you make a decision about what you're going to do, whether that's with your career or for your relationships or whatever it is, you are all in. Like, you are totally 2 feet in. And I was like, well, yeah, because once I make that decision, I don't look back and I don't second guess myself. And once that decision is made, I turn off the negative self-talk and the chatter that's going on and I just move forward. And I think that's a skill set that not everybody has. And they, a lot of times, don't make the decision and don't move forward because the fear and the self-doubt and the chatter stops them from ever moving forward. They're like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I don't do that. And so part of my book and the lessons in my book is explaining how I don't do that and the things that I do to help with my mindset and to help me make decisions and journaling and the resources that I've tapped into. So it's not like I'm just making rash decisions. I am making smart decisions. And when I make them, then it is like full steam ahead in that direction.
So in that, have you ever made a misstep? Have you ever put 2 feet in some quicksand? Or what, has there been
No.
any failures or has it just been lessons?
No, I think everything is just a lesson. I don't look at it like anything is actually a failure at all. I think if you make a decision and you start something and it doesn't work, that just means that that wasn't the path that you were meant to be on. And I really am pretty good at looking at what was I supposed to learn. I'll use my first marriage as an example. And we dated for 8 years and then we got married. And 6 months later, I asked for a divorce. And it was like, you just got married. And it's like, well, but I hadn't woken up to some of the signs that I had married my mother. And that was not going to work for me. And then once I realized that, should I have not gotten married in the first place? Yes, I shouldn't have. But I look at it like I had to go through that process and through that journey in order to then be able to see what I saw in that relationship and how bad that was going to be for me in the long term. So I just look at it all as it's all part of the lesson and none of it's a failure. And if it takes me down a road that's slightly different, if I had launched my book and no one liked it, but yet one person did, that would be a success. Then that would be great. If I can launch my book and 1 million people buy it, then that is beyond like my wildest dreams. And that would be amazing to know that I could touch so many people with my story. So I think when you start the journey, if you're starting the journeys with your heart in the right place and your intention in the right place, then the path is just the lessons and how you get there.
So, Jeanne, is there a formula for 2 feet in, or is it more an ethereal like combination of what works for different people?
It's a little bit more what works for different people and where you are in different times. So sometimes people say to me, I know I don't want to do what I'm doing now, but I don't know what else I want to do. And so I'll say to them, okay, it doesn't have to be like me. I was like this drastic 180. Why don't you take these baby steps towards identifying what are your passions? What makes you happy? Focus on a hobby, devote some time to that hobby. And maybe over time that can become a side gig. And then that side gig grows. And then all of a sudden that side gig becomes the real gig. And like work your way there gradually. If you don't have the financial means, I was fortunate that I could invest in myself and invest in my business to be able to launch my own business. And not everybody can, but that doesn't mean that that can't still be a goal. You shouldn't feel like you are so stuck that you can never get there. That just means you have to go about it slightly differently. And that means that becomes your side hustle. That becomes your side passion. And I always approached it not in terms of how is this choice going to make me money? I always looked at it differently. How is this choice going to bring me purpose? How is this choice going to fulfill my need for life-work balance? How is this choice going to result in me feeling the way I want to feel about my life and my contributions? The money and how you make money at those choices will come second. So the finance part of the work became the back burner. And then I was able to focus on things that really have so much more meaning. And then when you're doing them for a purpose and you have intention behind what you're doing, it's amazing the opportunities that come to you. And now people come to me and say, would you speak here? Or would you do this? Or would you do that? And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, that's like kind of a dream of mine. Yeah. And that's when it's really cool because, yeah, can I get paid for it? Yes. And that's amazing. But it's also so much bigger than that.
We've talked about work-life balance, and as an entrepreneur, that's quite often a difficult balance or formula because we love what we do, as you've just described. It doesn't feel like work, it's just exciting and we're getting paid for it. Yet, you've also talked about journaling, so you have a lot of energy. Is this energy always here? Is there downtime? What's your view on work-life balance or life-work balance?
So I have a really strong view on that. So after I got fired, I made a conscious decision to say, I don't know why we call it work-life balance. Everyone does. Every article's written work-life balance. I was like, I am changing that narrative and it is life-work balance. And there's a whole chapter in my book about this. And I 100% live my life with life coming first and work coming second. And that doesn't mean that don't work. I work all the time. My brain never stops working, but I make different choices as a result of that. And so a perfect real life example. 2 weeks ago, I had completely overcommitted. I had committed to meet a client at 5 o'clock. I had committed to go to an upscale gallery event at 6 o'clock in a different town where I had to get all dressed up. And the client meeting was at a construction site with dust. So I'd committed to go to this gallery event. I had to be there between 6 and 6:30, all dressed up, black tie, very formal. And then I'd also committed to going out to dinner with a friend after the gallery event. And I was so anxious all afternoon and in between I had to come home and feed my dogs because there's no one home to do that. And I was so anxious because I had so overcommitted and each one of these things were important and they each mattered. But at the end of the day, I cut out the gallery event because I had to meet with my client And I chose to have dinner with my girlfriend instead of the gallery event because it wasn't possible to do both. And I hadn't seen my girlfriend in like a month. And I just thought, I'm going to the gallery event because it's a networking event and it might be great. And I might meet somebody that could really help my business and my platform, or I might not. And sometimes you just have to say no. And I chose the life. And the life was my friend who I hadn't seen in a long time. And that was important to me. And honestly, it was quite fine. And she was so happy that I made her the priority. So where the old me would have cut her out and would have chose the gallery event. And so it's just a slightly different mindset of making slightly different choices at certain times and making sure that I fit in enough time in my life for the friends and for the family and for me. I exercise every single day. And that often means I don't actually start work of interacting with clients until 10, but that's me time. And that is so important to me and who I am. I'm like, why be an entrepreneur if I can't journal, meditate, and work out in the morning? Why? They want to see me at 6 o'clock at night. I'm happy to do that. But that means my morning is me and making that a priority because that's what keeps me centered and that's what gives me wellness. So that's how I really do. I walk the walk and talk the talk on the life work balance part for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And that is definitely something so many of us struggle with, finding the time to get everything in order and have everybody happy. And as a mom, I get it too, constantly feeling like juggling. But the best part about being an entrepreneur for me is that I can go to sports day without asking a boss, can I go to sports day? I
Correct.
just go to sports day and I have a great time.
Yes.
Sometimes I bring my
Yeah.
laptop because the reality is I might need to do some work while I'm there, but that's okay too. And I think that's what, for me, is the best thing about being an entrepreneur. But for you, what do you think is the absolute best part of being an entrepreneur?
It's that, but I'll take it one step further. I'm responsible for my stress. And I can dial the stress up and dial the stress down based on the amount of work I take on or how quickly I commit to get certain things done for clients. And so I control the stress knob where I feel like when I worked in corporate America, someone else controlled the stress that I felt and the timelines that were put on me. And if I went to go to sleep for my daughter the entire time, I was like waiting for them to call, waiting for them to Slack. How many emails are piling up while I'm here? I wasn't present at all. And so now that I'm my own boss and I can control the stress and I can control the schedule and I can control the calendar, I also can be much more present. And that is an incredible gift because our kids grow up so fast and it goes by so fast. And, to not be present and not enjoy it is just a waste. And stress kills us. I mean, it just does. Like stress will just physically kill you if you're not paying attention to it. I would say those are the best things.
I love that, dialing the stress knob. I love that, just that thought of that, because it's so real. That's so amazing. So let's just ask one more question about resilience, because of course we are the resilient entrepreneurs. So we must ask you, what do you think is the one thing that truly helps someone to become resilient?
Journaling about the times that things have worked out and the universe has provided. I find anytime I have any doubt or I am lacking confidence in something, if I just sit down and really, it's a brainstorm dump and it takes a little while sometimes in the beginning when I start to do it, but really think back to all the times that it did work out okay and that the universe did provide. And then that reminds me, like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. Like, you will be able to bounce back. You will find a solution. And then sometimes I will go for a walk. And when I go for a walk with whatever that challenge is, if I'm outside in nature and I'm walking, it is amazing how I will solve that problem while I'm walking. And I'll come home and I'll be like, oh my goodness, I figured it out. I know what I'm going to do. Right. And so I find for me, it's journaling, meditating, going for a walk, and really just reminding myself of all the times that things do work out okay. Because they do.
They do. And I have a favorite expression, Jeanne: everything will work out in the end. And if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end.
I love that one. That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
We're coming to the end of this episode of Resilient Entrepreneurs, and we do have a question for you, which is you asking us a question. We've been doing this just recently, and it's kind of fun for our guests to ask us any question at all about anything. So you're the interviewer, and we're in the hot seat.
I love it. Okay. So my question for each of you would be the same. And it would be, what specifically do you do for inner wellness for yourself? So Laura, I'll start with you.
That's a good question. For inner wellness, I think you and I are very alike because you just mentioned two of the things that I absolutely do when I'm stuck. The journaling and the walking in nature, absolutely huge. And the journaling is something I've been fairly new at. I think over my lifetime, I've always journaled here and there, but I never took it very seriously or used it frequently. But recently, when I've been dealing with some personal challenges, I've been just using like free journaling, whereas I don't think I could read my handwriting. It's so bad. But it's not the point to reread it. It's the
It's on
point
the
of just
plate.
getting it out of my brain. That movement of just hands and mind and just letting it go really, really fast and just dumping it on paper so I can get it out of my head, because I found that a lot has been trapped up in there recently. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot going on in the world and everything too that just feels very overwhelming. So that's helped me release a lot and be able to just be calmer, more centered, sleep better, all that good stuff. And certainly I'm like you, when I have a deep problem and something I can't quite figure out, if I just go for a walk, it's that headspace, I think, without all the distractions, that gives you the time to process. And even if you're not like actively thinking about the problem, somewhere along the way, it's sort of the answer like pops in your head. And it's like your subconscious just been working back there. So I too use a lot of that for my inner wellness. And so thank you. That's a great question.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm glad those work for you too. Vicki, how about you?
Oh, it is a great question indeed. So my inner wellness is going to be three-pronged. One is nutritional, the other is emotional, and the other will be spiritual. So nutritional first, I've made some changes in the last 6 months to what I eat, how I eat, when I eat, and it's a lifestyle change, complete lifestyle change, and I feel incredibly nourished inside because of it. That would be the first one, because that then I noticed changed the spiritual wellness and the emotional wellness. Incredible change from gut health to brain health to everything health. So then the spiritual wellness is yoga. Usually it's a practice that I do at home. It's not a consistent practice, but it's there when I feel the need to call in. And then my emotional wellness is that I'm a life coach, and so I coach myself or I'll get coached.
There you go. I love all of those. Nutrition, we could talk for another hour about nutrition and gut health in our 50s. Like,
Oh, hello.
I've changed my diet so drastically twice in the last 2 years, and it is amazing how it impacts your life when you change your lifestyle around how you eat and what you eat. And even though I thought I was eating so healthy, but I was not, my body was not liking it at all. And it
Yep.
is truly unbelievable how you can make some changes and have more energy and, to your point, sleep better and your skin gets better. And it's mind blowing. It really is unbelievable.
I think I
Yeah.
love this phase of life because I think it's making us very like blinders on, focused on health and really
Yeah.
our best selves, because you can't. There's no room for anything else. Exactly. We got to be 100% in and thinking about it all and holistically,
All the time.
because
Uh-huh.
yeah, there's a lot of changes. I'm sure we're all pretty similar in that stage and going through it. So I feel you. I get you. I'm sure there's other ladies out there who know exactly what we're
Yep.
talking about without getting in too much of it. Because
Exactly. Yep.
yeah, we're there. We're right there with you. So thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that. Thanks for asking that question, because we should all be
You're
thinking
welcome.
about that question.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask it. You guys had great answers, so insightful. So that's helpful. And it's good for your listeners to know a little peek into you too. That's why I love that you do that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we hope so. And hope we get to know us a little bit better as they're getting to know our amazing guests like you. And I just want to wrap up by saying thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation from a woman who is very resilient. You have to go read her story because she just gave you like a little tiny taste of her life story. There is so much more behind what makes Jeanne such a resilient person, human being, and no doubt has huge things to come, because I think your book is magnificent. I think your speaking is phenomenal. The fact that you love to do podcasts, and I have a podcast coming out. We'll link everything we can below in our show notes so that people can connect, find you. you and learn more about your story, because the stories that we have and we share, we open the door for others to tell their story. And it is really important to reach out, to speak to people. We talked about that today, about being vulnerable, getting help, sharing, so that others can help you with your perspective, and just don't stay stuck in the mud. 2 feet in and go for it. It's brilliant advice. It was a brilliant conversation. Jeanne, thank you so very much.
Thank you both so much, Laura and Vicki. It was a pleasure. It was such fun to talk to you. So wishing you the best with your podcast and your week.
Same right back to you.